Thank you for tuning into The Truth with Trinity, and I am your host, Trinity. So, without further ado, I'd like to jump into this episode's topic, which is: are black people still playing the role of Sambo and Mammy and don't even know it? I want to first start off by saying that there is nothing new underneath the sun, and that's why it's so very much important that we not only encourage our young black people and children to study their own history, but also promote it, because a lot of the stereotypes and tricks and methods that are used have been, in place for, hundreds of years. And, you're able to recognize the trickology better if you know your history. And it also gives you a sense of pride and a direction as to where you're going. Okay? And I wanted to talk about the Mammy and Sambo role. Okay? First, I'd like to start with a small disclaimer. This episode is for educational purposes and to bring self awareness and awareness to issues that we have as black people in this country. So, I wanted to start off by saying, when one looks at the stereotype, Mammy, Mandingo, Coon, and Jezebel, you find them in old white literature, okay, and movies and television shows. You'll see, the black woman, depicted as bug eyed, frightened, jumping around, loud, things of that nature. You have, the black man, which we'll get on in a second, and where you once had white men who painted his face black. Okay, so this is getting into blackface. Okay, blackface, especially for the younger generations who don't know, it's a white man who painted his face completely black and wore white gloves, and to mock black men by singing, tap dancing, cracking jokes, acting silly, wild, and jumping around the stage, okay, like a jester. Okay, so this is the role, and then you have black characters, so little statues, little glass statues and whatnot of tar black people, black women with scarves and black men. So this was the stereotype in the face of black America, and what our ancestors fought to erase those stigmas and stereotypes. But I have a question for us as black people. Have black men now become the new model of blackface? Okay, so are we blackfacing ourselves as black people, so black men and women? Okay? And what I mean by that is, are we, at one time, it was, a white man making fun of us with blackface, jumping up and down on a stage, tap dancing, eating watermelon. But are we as black people now, have we blackfaced ourselves? Are we the ones making fun of our own selves, jumping up and down for a little bit of change on stage? Promoting the same images, okay, that we say off stage that this is not us. And we promote this, and it's saturated throughout our communities, but then we get upset when someone else from another culture or another race points it out. Okay? So, like I said before, these terms are used to define and dehumanize black women and men. So the Sambo, Mammy, um, you know, descriptions, from slavery till throughout the Jim Crow era. So this is when you mainly heavily heard, and it was widely accepted. Nowadays, these terms, if vocalized, are considered, extremely offensive. Even if they hide it, they say outwardly that it's offensive, to say it now. Yet, have these same roles taken on another name, but the same roles remain for blacks. Okay, so you can't say Jezebel, you can't say Sambo, Mammy, and Mandingo anymore, but now are the same roles still present, yet have another name though? Let's look at the terms Sambo and Coon, who was portrayed as, so these are the terms that Coon and Sambo, which are referring to, in a racist term of black men: lazy, easily frightened, chronically idle, inarticulate. So let's break down how these are the terms that were used back in the day, but how we as black people, and on this, part we're talking about black men, how they're still falling into the same stereotypes, and why it's so important for the black man and black woman to educate themselves. Let's look at lazy. So they said, even though you picked cotton all day back then, even though you worked all sorts of hours, that you were considered lazy. And I think this is really referring to the mentality, to the mental state of the black man, because he was always working physically, manual labor. So let's look at the hood, the urban area, which is called the hood. It's set up like an obstacle course, a rat trap, some type of maze when you look at it. The black man rises from his bed, he hangs outside, gets into criminal trouble, has a criminal record, so he obtains a criminal record from being outside and, not having anything else to do, then becomes permanently dependent on females. So his credit is at zero. He can't lease or get an apartment or buy a home, and he has a zero. He has a no job. Other than in illegal activities, and that leaves him permanently dependent on the black female, which in turn leaves the black woman. It's hard for her to have respect for this type of black man. When you look at easily frightened, so this is another characteristic that they portrayed, Sambo or Coon as easily frightened. When you see them on TV, especially back in those old days, when someone gets startled, their eyes kind of, widen. So they had us always, in this widened-eyed, bug-eyed look. Okay, easily frightened. Most black brothers, not all, but most black brothers are afraid to be around other black men in the urban areas out of fear that they will murder, rob, or betray one another. Out of fear that a cop will murder them. They fear doing long jail time. Okay, so all this fear, they fear loving black women. They fear loving themselves. So easily frightened, chronically idle. When you're idle, that means, when a car is idle, for example, it's at a standstill. So it's not in any other shift. It's standing still. It's in park mode. And when we look at chronically idle, when it refers to the black man, the black man's mind is focused on music, sex, and drugs, which leaves his mind empty and unable to focus on the critical issues of life, his family, his children, his woman, education, and his resources and financial resources and his neighborhood and surroundings. Okay, so the black man's mind is idle on one part. He's stuck on the sex and drugs and music. Okay, and he's not focused on the other parts that he should be. And then when you look at inarticulate, so this is another characteristic that they stated, about black people, period. Now this was referring to black men and women. They called us inarticulate buffoons. We have a black culture that promotes at times speaking unintelligible. Okay, and little do a lot of younger people know that, our Ebonics was broken up with slave talk. And this is talk, number one, because we did not have access to education. We did not have access to be able to read. Okay, so we talked the best way that we could. And another part is it was speaking code so that the slaveholders wouldn't understand certain things that we were saying. Okay, but nowadays, what black people used back in the day as survival, now we're using it as just our way of living, and we wonder why sometimes we can't get ahead. And some blacks have often criticized other blacks for not speaking broken English. So in our community, we need to stop that, because like I said in one other episode, none of us are speaking our black heritage language. We're all speaking white. Even if it's unintelligible, the European language is English language, and the English language is a white person's language. So we're all speaking white, quote unquote, And I want to flip it and talk about who Mammy was. Okay, so Mammy was depicted as the black woman, with the scarf on her head, the bonnet on her head, She lived her life vicariously through the white family she worked for. So when the white family hurt, she hurt. If there was a white death in the family, she felt more. She had to be more sad than they were. When there was a happiness, she had to be more happy than they were. But she was never able to talk about her own life. Okay, she was a totally devoted slave. Okay, best known for raising white children, breastfeeding white children, raising, clothing, feeding, doting on white children, and breeding black slaves. So she couldn't even give attention to her own children just to have them and give birth and get back to caring for the white children. Okay, Mammy is often depicted today. So in 2021, okay, so that was back then, but now they've gotten slick with it. Okay, the black woman is depicted now in roles that are that of a comedian. Okay, so black women, especially the darker brown skin and dark woman, she's basically never seen in romantic roles where she's sought after, but just being loud, boisterous, wild, always the one cracking a joke. Okay, she's always chasing some man. Okay, always the single good friend that is the bridesmaid, or she helps the non-black woman date and fall in love. So she's always the one that's the good friend. She's never the one in the main role that's being married, hardly. While the black woman remains single in most of these stereotypes and roles that you see on TV. The strong single mother role. So this is another way that Mammy is portrayed in 2021. Just the role of she's strong, she can do it on her own. She's the strong single mother. Okay, and also she always has to solve everyone else's problems. That's part of the Mammy role, and that's what you see a lot in the stereotypes in Hollywood. The black woman always has to be there for everyone else. She always has to solve everyone else's problems. Um, and I'm going to have to cut this short because I'm going to make this into two segments. So, if you'd like, you can stay tuned for part two, which is who is Mandingo and who is Jezebel. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Please stay tuned for part number two.